Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to summarize SK Telecom or T1 versus GENG. It was quite a disappointing series. If you want to stay away from spoilers, turn off this video right now. So I was talking a lot about how I was hopeful for GENG's growth at the beginning of Spring Split because they played in a way that really excited me. Very 2v2 heavy. Around mid lane, BDD played a lot of LeBlanc, Talia, and so forth, and racked up a lot of MVP performances and eventually became the MVP of the split. BDD was a very exciting player because his synergy with Clid was very strong. And this is something that just was lost over time with GENG, which is very surprising. I think today in the series that was played, they completely lost track of what made them strong and what made them have the first seed in the first place. And now if people ask me again, which LCK teams am I the most excited for, then T1 and DRX are the ones that are left there because GENG really disappointed me. A lot of the issues came from how they drafted. The draft was a massive problem. We had another 3-0 at our hands that came mostly due to preparation, but I think also T1 just played better. I think individually T1 looked way better. I think the standout performances came from Cuz and also from Effort and Teddy. I think they were just, you know, really insane in comparison to their counterparts. I felt like Ruler couldn't really do much because AD carry as a position is very reliant on what's happening around you, and if you have the moments to shine, you can. Ruler is still a fantastic player, I think. I think Clid really dropped the ball. BDD really dropped the ball. So that brings us to the draft. So I mentioned the strengths, you know, the strengths of GENG and what I really enjoy about GENG. It was something that just wasn't showcased at all in today's drafts. So for those wondering why SK Telecom lost 2 bans, it's because they were late at the LCK Park. If you want my opinion as to why, like what I think about that, I think it's pretty bad because I think in the finals you shouldn't punish teams that affects the game, instead fine them financially, like make them lose a part of the prize money or something like that. I think loss of ban is too extreme and affects the games too much. But T1 managed to take the victory anyway, which makes them more impressive. GENG attack Cuz's champion pool, Gragas, Trundle, Olaf, all bans targeted towards T1. Maybe these are bans that also are going to help Clid, because Clid also, in a lot of cases, also has a relatively small champion pool, but T1 prepared this Graves pick. So Graves is interesting as a jungler. You know, the way you want to beat Graves is you make sure that your jungle pick is good into the enemy champs. It's very difficult to find a jungle that is good specifically into Graves. I think if you want to play anything, you know, I think, you know, maybe you can get away with playing Karthus, something that farms well. I've seen Nidalee being played into it. I think Lee Sin also works. But Rek'Sai is an absolute disaster because what is the purpose of Rek'Sai? If Rek'Sai is not stronger than the enemy jungler early game, I don't see how Rek'Sai is ever going to do anything. In the past, you got away with picking Rek'Sai a lot because he had the global ultimate, but here Rek'Sai will do absolutely nothing. So I have a Graves first pick, Aphelios, Ornn. Not too shabby, but the Ornn prio hasn't even gone down because Ornn is something that you can easily deal with. Graves is something that is decent into Ornn because you can, of course, dodges R and you can also smoke screen Aphelios. So Graves is always going to be like okay in most cases because he's a champion with a dash that has good base stats. So I'm happy that Graves is making a resurgence. Sylas gets locked in as the so-called counter pick into Ornn. You know, it's alright. I don't think it necessarily wins out the lane super hard against Ornn, but it gives you access to an Ornn ultimate, and there are some situations where Sylas, the champion, can pop off, but I don't think it's like a hard counter, especially in this case because Aphelios ultimate is not that exciting for Sylas. But with the way the fights were playing out in this game, Sylas always had Ornn ultimate on cooldown in these team fights. We all know that LCK games tend to be very slow, and you know, Sylas Ornn ultimate is a very long cooldown, but it just didn't seem to matter in these series. So that makes, you know, puts more value into the Sylas basket. And then we had the Varus lock-in. So Teddy showcased us the true power of Varus. We've seen it every now and then. Attack speed Varus, lethality Varus. This was the lethality Varus that got locked in. Fine matchup into Aphelios. And it was, you know, the key thing why Varus gets locked in more and more, especially by teams in the East, is because it's such a champion that has so much diversity. You pick it early on and it doesn't have a inherent clear weakness. He has strong lane, he can itemize differently, he can pick different keystones that changes the tone of the champion completely. His itemization is strong because you can't like stack armor into him. You can't really stack armor into him, and you know, you have the option of going Ginzu that gives you magic penetration, armor penetration. Varus is just very well rounded. His ultimate also, Mercury value and so forth. It's just a very, very good mixture of everything Varus. And the fact that he has, you know, 2 modes. You can have the lethality Varus with the poke, and also the attack speed Varus is very important. This game, if people watch Twitch Live, I thought, you know, when I see a Varus against Ornn Rek'Sai, I would imagine that most of the time you go attack speed because you need to kill these tanks. 4th pick Azir I thought was good. I didn't like the Rek'Sai 3rd pick. It just didn't make any sense. I think it's very, very bad to lock it in against Graves. You're just at a disadvantage the whole game. So what's the purpose of it? I think here you pick something that is better into enemy champ. I think you go Lee, you go Jarvan, something that just does something against enemy champion. I think Lee probably would be the best option. You know, at least you have some options, add level 6 to 2v2, 3v3, and at the same time, you know, you can be good into Varus and you can 2v2 on top side with Ornn. Here, Rek'Sai, I just don't like it. I really, really don't like it. LeBlanc Kassadin lining up for Azir. Yasuo gets banned because of Rek'Sai Ornn, and Zoe is a staple ban against BDD. Azir gets 4th picked, which of course lines up for the Corki. And then the trash blind pick is a Thing of Beauty. Thing of Beauty here because T1 already decided the moment they saw Azir, they have this composition that is prepared in a way where you are playing the poke game. You're never going to force into Azir, and Azir hates to play against a composition that wants to play the full poke game. Corki, lethality Varus, a lot of rockets. Trash can be used to deny any potential engage and saves Varus from danger, while Corki, Sylas, and Graves can save themselves from danger. So this is a beautiful composition that is going to deny Ornn, and at the same time put Azir in a position where he has a very, very hard time. Next thing in line is, of course, the Yuumi pick. So Yuumi, you know, on paper, it might make sense, you know, you are denying some of the poke here and so forth, but you're giving up your early game completely and you have a Rek'Sai already. So this game, you know, Thresh Varus are going to have full prior bottom. When you have full prior bottom, it means that you're going to, of course, pick up the dragons, you're going to pick up the Rift Heralds, and this is exactly what T1 did. Later down the line, Corki and Sylas are going to win split push, and GENG will be in a position where they need to group as 5. So T1, at every point in the game, are going to generate more gold. You want to look at GENG's composition and think, okay, Azir is going to scale well, Ornn is going to scale well, Aphel is going to scale well, but they're going to do so bleeding very, very badly. Luckily, in this game, GENG had, you know, Cloud Drake blessed the Rift. T1 had 2 Drakes. And GENG managed to secure some Cloud Drakes, but it didn't matter. This game took a bit longer than usual because T1 were a bit too afraid to pull the trigger on Nash. They had this opportunity to take Nash early on and then continue on. And they also lost a fight where Sylas actually committed into the fight, but all they need to do is play on poke and play on distance and play on time. So this was a game that eventually GENG made easier, and T1 finished. There was a very, very long game. It got a bit scary because GENG actually were in a position where they actually got to full item Aphelios, but luckily something I need to show is, I need to show it. It has to be a part of the review here because it was absolutely crazy. Hello KSI, sorry guys, give me just one moment to show you. T1 versus GENG, absolutely crazy guys, absolutely crazy. This is something that was a bit sickening. Because I think in a world where Azir itemizes properly, so let me just show you guys. Look at this. Look at this Azir build, okay? Look at this Azir build and tell me that you don't want to pull your eyes out. So that's honestly vomit worthy. Okay, so we let that rest for a moment, and then we have the game-winning moment. The game-winning moment. Here, the game-winning moment came from the fact... So this was very, very disappointing, okay? This was very disappointing because Rek'Sai showed on the map. That was the only reason T1 started Nash. So here, Rek'Sai shows on the map, they ping him out, and they just start the Nasher. And Rek'Sai is nowhere to be found. You can see him on the minimap. He's trying to come towards the Nasher, and then GENG tried to stop it way too late, but they finish it. There we go, 2k auto into Nash, and then the fight is just really awkward because GENG are out of position. They're out of position, and this was a situation where the game was definitely winnable for GENG if Azir did proper itemization. Why did I sound like Kermit the Frog? If Rek'Sai didn't show here because T1 were nervous about pulling the trigger. So someone in the chat is asking why this build is so terrible. Well, Luden's Echo is troll. Zhonya's Hourglass is Giga troll. What's the purpose of Zhonya's Hourglass in this build? You upgrade Zhonya's Hourglass, you have an Ornn on your team and you upgrade Zhonya's Hourglass. You're putting a lot of gold and value into armor, which is a pointless stat. You have 4 items, no Void Staff. He has way too much cooldown reduction. Like he has Comet as well. Like he's running Comet. Like everything about it is just terrible. Like he's running Comet. For sure he has Transcendence. He has 60% CDR in his build. Morello is not too terrible. Like Morello isn't the biggest problem about this build because Aphelios didn't want to itemize into Executioners because he has armor penetration naturally in his build or in his champion kit. But it's just a tragedy of a build. And this was the only game that I felt like GENG might have had a chance because T1 definitely slowed down a lot in this game. Let's continue on to the next game. This was a very, very good, like the first game is a good showcasing of how to play a poke composition and how to play Thresh, because Effort to me was the clear MVP of this game. Okay, not clear because Graves maybe deserves it. Okay, we scroll down a little bit. Let's make it fit the screen. Boom. Next game. So here it was very, very confusing. Very confusing because T1 this time around got the bans. They banned Elise Kalista. Adaptation here, Graves ban instead of the Olaf ban. Varus lock-in, Ornn, Ezreal. No Olaf takeaway. I think Olaf should be higher prioritized here, especially into Varus. Olaf is so strong into Varus. You lock in the Ezreal, which might be fine into Varus. You struggle with the lethality Varus, but it means you sacrifice bottom matchup. You're going to be behind on prio, and at the same time you lock in Ornn. So already from the get-go, Ornn Ezreal means you have 2 very weak sides of the map that are difficult to play for. Sure, there are some scenarios where you can play for Ezreal, but sure, it's also sometimes quite difficult. Sylas, Olaf rotation, Olaf very strong in the early game, especially in LCK. You know, when a team looks at the enemy potential in 3v3 and they say, oh, they're stronger, they don't take any major chances. So Olaf, like if he's full clearing all over the map, it's very rare that the team actually takes chances and pulls the trigger. Jarvan gets locked in, better than the Rek'Sai for sure. You lock in the Jarvan. Can be decent into Olaf, can be decent into Varus. You know, it's way better than the Rek'Sai, for sure. Thresh, Tahm Kench gets banned. Kind of confusing to see Tahm Kench ban, but I think they expected the Yuumi ban and they really wanted to go for the Galio-Jarvan combo. So Tahm Kench can deny this. But Galio-Jarvan here is absolute trash. Why would you want to go for Galio-Jarvan here? You are really giving up the draft here. Because you're picking Galio into Olaf and Sylas, which is not that great to begin with. Galio most of the time will have to go into bottom side. And the bigger tragedy is not necessarily Galio, because you pick Galio, send them bot, and you have this neat combo, whatever. You know, you have Galio, Ezreal, whatever. You sacrifice your bot lane. Karma gets locked in, and they, once again, you know what T1 is doing is they are lining themselves up for a kite composition with Corki, Karma, and Varus, but it's easier to catch them because they don't have a Thresh this time, and Effort absolutely smurfed that game. The key thing here is you need to have something to play for. You need to have something to play for. We mentioned this many times, and they lock in the Zilean last. Zilean into Corki. Corki is going to have prio. He's going to go the man immune. He's going to scale like an absolute monster. You don't have any 3v3 potential, no 2v2 potential, no 2v2 potential. It is just tragic. And at the same time, Zilean sucks against poke. It just is terrible against poke. Sure, you have the composition that wants to all in and get in line and you rush in and then maybe you can get some value out of Zilean ult. But at the same time, you're giving Sylas a Zilean ult. You're giving Sylas a Zilean ult. Your goal of this combo is to kill Varus. Your goal is to kill Varus, burn his flash, and then just go. But it just never happened. T1, similar to the previous game, have all the prio and the pressure early game, and as long as Varus, if T1 is 2 ahead, there's just too many targets to kill here. You have tools to deal with Varus, but Varus won't be the main issue because T1 is going to be ahead from the early game. The main issue here will be Corki. Corki will 1v9 this whole game. That's the issue. I think if they went LeBlanc 5th, it would make sense, because then at least you would have a good matchup in the mid lane. It's just the Zilean lock-in ruins this completely. You know, you pick Galio. If Galio support puts you in a position where the enemy blind picks Corki, and you can pick a 5th that is good into Corki. Let's say they have Jarvan and LeBlanc mid, and they have something to play for. Then it will look a lot better. But in this situation, when you lock in Zilean, it is just... it's pointless. It's pointless. I think Zilean is the big tragedy here. Because they have a combo that is good against Varus, but the rest of their champs are just not good against Corki, Olaf, Sylas, Karma. Like they are just... they get too much value. And the early game will be very, very rough. I said on the review that GENG need to find ways to break this bottom matchup because of Varus, Karma are untouched. It's just they were too worried about the Olaf, and it never kind of happened. And also Teddy Neffert is one of the bot lanes that are hardest to gank in the world, I feel, from the games that I watched. So I think, sure, you can break this apart and you can find some opportunities in the early game, but it just didn't happen. I think you needed to lock in LeBlanc here. You need to lock in LeBlanc. You needed to pick... LeBlanc is just perfect. I think LeBlanc is just perfect, honestly. And I think if you lock in Ornn, Ezreal first 2, you need to be committed to the idea of having better 2v2 mid. GENG, like BDD, had one of the best LeBlancs that I saw all year. I just felt like GENG lost their identity. It's just, honestly, a tragedy. And people are going to say, oh, I said GENG and DRX look better than T1. This was very early on in the season. This was... maybe week 3 in LCK, and things change. Things definitely change, and T1 looked like the strongest. They figured out how they want to draft. I think DRX, if they figure out how to draft, I think still DRX have the highest ceiling, because I think individually they look like monsters, and in that series, Kana just put Doran in the dumpster. So, LeBlanc was the key pick here. I'm not a fan of Galio lock-in. When you see Olaf Sylas, I just don't like it. So I think still Zilean is the biggest culprit here. Zilean belongs in a museum. Like even in a world where Sylas steals Zilean ultimate and GENG lock down Varus and they get him and they kill him, Sylas ult with Zilean ult is just gonna buy so much time, and Corki is just gonna 1v9 the fight. Corki has the freest game of his life because he has Zilean on the opposing side. No one's gonna be able to match Corki, and Corki can easily go. People are talking about Azir in the chat, but Azir is terrible. What's the point of picking Azir? Azir is better than Zilean, but I don't think Azir is that great in comparison to LeBlanc. Okay, we go into the last draft because this is also quite funny. Last draft of the game, Trundle, Olaf, Varus. This was GENG. They banned Varus finally after 2 games of Varus domination. First pick Sejuani. So first pick Sejuani is... yeah. First pick Sejuani. I thought they would just first pick Gragas here. Just first pick Gragas. That's okay, First pick Gragas. That's okay. You can go for that. Set Zoe. I like the Zoe ban first 3 here in comparison to the first 3 games, because I think after BD shat the bed 2 games in a row, I think it's sensible to imagine that he's going to go for Zoe. But they can't predict the Sejuani first pick, because Zoe Sejuani is not going to be that great, but Sejuani is a bit silly. Aphelios gets locked in, Varus is out, T1 showed their priority, Aphelios comes after Varus. Understandable. Aphelios is still a fantastic champ. Even though I lost the first game, Aphelios is still a fantastic champ. It's just that it seems T1 have a higher preference on Varus because of what we mentioned before about Varus. Right? Sylas, just the freest Sylas of your life, already from the get-go, right? You want to pick Sylas, you are going to send it into jungle against Sejuani. You're going to scale well, you're going to have a free early jungle, and you're going to steal a very strong ultimate. Kalista gets locked in, something that was banned in some of the previous games. Aphelios Kalista, I think here you need to look to pick support already. I think locking in Thresh was the way. I think if you lock in Thresh, you have a strong bottom lane matchup, because even if you lock in Taric here, I think Aphelios Thresh will have too easy of a time. But at least it's better than leaving support till second wave. Because leaving support till second wave, you lock in the Jace. What is the actual gain from locking in Jace? I don't think Jace would be banned. I think it's better to just lock in support. I think picking Volibear, Kalista into Thresh Aphelios, you are on a timer that is very, very hard to break. Meaning that you are in a position where you need to snowball this lane, but snowballing this lane is unbelievably difficult, especially when you have Sejuani jungle. Sejuani, Kalista, Volibear need to snowball bottom, and at the same time you have a Jace top that needs to snowball top. So Jace and Kalista is pretty much very similar in terms of what they want to do as champions. Kalista doesn't scale that well. We've seen games where Kalista scales well only because of Taric, because you can play super aggressive, and the Taric ultimate, the Taric is the one that is doing all the scaling for Kalista to enable the Kalista. So in this game, Kalista Volibear, they need to punish Thresh Aphelios, Jace needs to punish Ornn, and it's just too much to ask for when you have a Sejuani jungle. Too much to ask for. And I think here, if you have, like, you lock in Sejuani, I think it was terrible. You know, first pick Gragas, enemy go Aphelios, Sylas, you can still go Sylas into it, right? You ban the Olaf, Gragas matchups are going to be great. It would be better. In this case, Kalista Jace gets locked in. Kalista Jace is pretty much the same champion on two different lanes. They want to snowball. And then you leave support till second wave. I think no way in hell T1 would actually ban Jace second wave. Thresh gets locked in, Blitzcrank Taric out, and then your go-to option is Volibear. That is just oof. That is just oof. And then the Zilean into Azir. You know, Zilean wasn't the biggest issue this game. There were other issues. And then the Ornn, of course, into Jace. So with that being said, you know, this series, this T1 game is all about them surviving the early game. If they survive the early game and they are not bleeding too bad, they're going to outscale heavily against the Volibear, Jace, Kalista. Volibear, Jace, Kalista are just not gonna do that well. They're just not gonna do that well later on in the game. Jace, the reason tanks are so good into Jace is because Jace is the most useful when he gets to buy full lethality, and buying full lethality into Ornn is kind of meh. So here, Jace needs to snowball early. He went phase rush this game, he got killed level 3, 1-for-1, and then he got dove against Sylas and Ornn. So T1 were playing with a clear intent, right? They were playing with clear intent, meaning Ornn and Sylas were playing together, they were snowballing the Jace, pushing him out of the game, while Sejuani accomplished absolutely nothing in bottom side. Absolutely nothing. So Thresh Aphelios is just too difficult to punish because they can actually dictate how they want to manage the wave. And at the same time, you have an early game composition and you have Zilean in mid lane once again. Zilean can be a fine denial pick into Azir if it ties your composition together well, but in this case, I think you're on a timer. You need to pick something that matches that idea. You know, you need to pick something that matches that idea. But then again, you have a Sejuani jungle, so how do you pick mid lane here that is good? You know? The only way to solve this is maybe go Jace mid or Irelia, but it's not that great, you know? Not that great. You have a Sejuani jungle, picking mid will always be difficult here. I just think Sejuani first pick is really troll. Really troll. Because this is more like, if you look at the enemy champions, maybe Zilean can work here in comparison to the previous game, right? In previous game, you sacrifice bottom matchup. For like you sacrifice bottom matchup for a Zilean mid into Corki. That's terrible. The enemy composition is full poke and Zilean ult is going to be weaker, right? And then in this case, you know, Zilean can make a little bit more sense. It's fine into Azir, can deny the engage, whatever. It can be okay. But at least there's no Varus, there's no Corki that's going to poke you out. So here, just GENG on a timer when they are very, very inactive as a team, especially in this series. It just seems like they are choking super hard against T1 every time they play against them, because Klid was a ghost of what he was in the early season. Another thing that is interesting to point out is the priority on Senna was non-existent. Senna is really busted in my eyes and in many other people's eyes, and Senna was just completely ignored in this series. Completely ignored, which is interesting. You know, it's an interesting point to point out. I'm very sad that we don't get to see MSI. I want to bring up the point as well because everyone's going to ask. Final point, you know, who are the best teams coming out of LCK? I think T1 and DRX. I still think DRX has a very, very high ceiling with the way they play. You know, they're playing through advantages through lane. They're trying to, you know, snowball the game from the get-go, and I think they play at a very, very high level. But I think their drafts have been letting them down because they are being too greedy. I think they're trying to be IG, but they're not quite IG. And I think if IG was less IG, they would be better. Because IG and DRX, they are both drafting full compositions to just snowball lanes. And it puts them in a very, very rough position. While T1's approach today was very similar to G2's approach, right? G2 had a very, very similar approach to this. This was very, very similar. T1 and G2 had very, very similar drafts on the day. And it's funny because it works both against GENG and against Fnatic. And that's why we have a 3-0. T1 had a preparationary victory and also a massive individual victory because I think Klid played very, very poorly. BDD played very, very poorly. And I think BDD is the key player. So to me, you know, to bring up the last question, you know, GENG, IG, I mean, DRX and IG are the type of teams that have a very high ceiling because of how good they are individually. I think Def is still an absolute monster. Chovy is insane. The support and the jungler, I can't remember the names of DRX anymore, but yeah, they're also fantastic. I think Doran had a rough series against Kana, but Kana is also improving. So T1 and DRX definitely the best teams coming out. I think GENG, I've lost faith. I've lost faith in GENG after this series and some of the games against T1. So thank you so much for watching. I hope the summary made sense for those who didn't want to watch the snooze fest because those are some long, sleepy games. Thank you so much for watching. All the best. Bye-bye.